Joe Rogan experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Listen, and I've been telling everybody that I eat mostly meat, and they look at me like I'm gonna die, and it's kind of fun. And I've had these conversations with people that are like, oh, well, you eat too much. Jimmy, can we get more water? And when you say that to them, they look at you like, oh shit. Like you just go out and
Oh,
like random plants, you get sick as fuck. That's real.
I don't know
But
what are
I
you
tell people
doing?
like mostly meat. They look at me like you're doing something really stupid. Like Rob Lowe started laughing at me. I said I have like an animal-based diet. Some people are plant-based. I'm animal. I love that word. Yeah, animal-based. Yeah. Just steal what they're saying and make it better. But what you said, what I've heard you say, that's an accurate way of describing it. Most plants are not edible, but almost every animal is edible.
I mean, and I think that if people spend time in the wilderness, regardless of the latitude, they'll start to appreciate this.
Yeah.
And I mostly spend time in latitudes that are further from the equator than not. But even at the equator, if you go walking around the woods or the forest or the jungle there, and you try to eat leaves or stems or bark,
You're gonna die.
you're gonna die really freaking fast.
Oh, how about people who collect mushrooms? Like they make mistakes. You know, like
So easy.
I remember there was a story about a guy in a nursing home, and he went out and picked mushrooms for the people in the nursing home, and cooked them up, and they all died. It's like because he fucked up. Probably his older guy couldn't see, or maybe just forgot what's edible, or maybe he was just losing his mind. But the point is, most of these things you see are not edible.
And if you think about it from the perspective of a plant, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
But we never do that. Anthropomorphization. We never think about that. But as I was learning about this, thinking about carnivore diets and animal-based diets, I had to learn a lot of stuff myself. I was trained as a physician. I wasn't trained as an anthropologist. I took ecology in college, but look at like what we know about the timeline of life on Earth. 500 plus million years of plant and animal coevolution. And there's a lot of people who have speculated that essentially plants evolved, animals start eating plants evolve defenses, animals evolve defenses against the defenses. And there's a whole series of enzymatic systems in our liver, phase one and phase two detoxification systems, cytochrome P450 and other reactionary systems in our liver that are meant to detoxify. And a lot of people speculate that it's really reasonable that the majority of the reason we have those is so that we could eat plants from time to time so we didn't starve during our evolution. There's a real interesting interaction here. This is rewarding. This is an arms race. It's 400 million years old between plants and animals. And so what's so interesting for me is I got deeper and deeper into this idea around can humans exist? Should humans exist? Will humans thrive on a completely animal-based diet? You start to realize, wait a minute, I reimagine that plants are benign. They're beautiful. They're fun to look at, but they are rooted in the ground. They can't run away from us. What's their defense? Well, if you're out in the desert, a cacti's got a thorn, or a rose has a thorn spine. Most of them just have plant defense chemicals. That's not even conjecture. It's just known botanical science that plants make chemicals, broadly called phytoalexins, that are meant to dissuade animals, insects, fungi from consuming. And so my fear is that we've assumed that plants are good for us. And we see everything with these plant compounds through the lens of these are good for us. How can we prove they're good for us? There's a whole different part of the story. What if you think about it from a plant's perspective? What if these plant chemicals are not good for us? And we're misinterpreting the research and talking about why I think we are. And maybe the plants are just making these chemicals to say, hey, you eat a lot of meat, you're not going to get thyroid, androgens, or sex hormones, or whatever, going to make you have diarrhea or nausea. We're going to kill you. And we've just been thinking more plants, more plants, more plants. Why do we eat plants in the first place?
No. Well, here's a question though. Is it good to eat some of them? Because there's this thing, and I know you've discussed this as well, the hormetic response, right? Like where your body responds to these effects that these plants are producing, and it actually, the response by your body is good. The same way the response from a sauna is good. Your body really doesn't belong at 180-degree temperature. When you put it at 180-degree temperature, it develops its heat from each other. It's actually good. It's good for you to do that for short periods of time. Is that possible in plants? Maybe some like I know ductworm attachments when you rock the sprouts. I think for that very reason.
Yeah. So this is really interesting, and if you think about it differently, it starts to make more sense, I believe. Or there's a whole different paradigm, a whole different lens in which we can use this. So as I was writing my book, I came up with these terms: environmental hormesis and molecular hormesis. Molecular hormesis is broadly termed xenohormesis by some people. Xeno is this Latin term that means alien or foreign. So when you think about these, in common parlance, people lump together exercise, ketosis, sunlight, sauna with plant compounds. I think that's not accurate. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we have environmental hormesis and molecular hormesis. They're different things. So I won't debate that plants can be beneficial as medicine, but to use them as food presupposes that molecular hormesis is good. And I'll tell you what I don't think it is. So when you go in the sauna, or when you are in ketosis, or when you're in the sun, when you exercise, you do generate reactive oxygen species, superoxide radicals, and they activate a system in your body called the NRF2 system. I can pull up a picture of it in a second. And that turns on genes that are involved in the antioxidant response to manage these free radicals. Life is this elegant dance of electron movement, and protons too, and other functional groups in chemistry. But the movement of electrons is oxidation and reduction, with the loss of electrons being oxidation, the gain of electrons being reduction. And so when we think about oxidative stress, we're talking about molecules pulling electrons from other molecules, creating free radicals, which is broadly means that there are unpaired electrons. Now, these are very reactive molecules that can then create things like peroxides or free radicals in the proteins, which change the conformation of the protein. And we know these can be damaging for humans. One of the reasons that cigarette smoking is bad for us is because it creates a ton of free radicals, lots of oxidative stress. But a little bit of oxidative stress, or just the right amount, the Goldilocks amount, is necessary for life. We don't want to get rid of all of the oxidative radicals in our body. They're critical signaling molecules at the level of the mitochondria. So this whole movement for antioxidants and more antioxidant chemicals is eventually, if we snuff out all of the oxidative radicals, all the reactive oxygen species in the body, we need these for signaling. So a little bit of oxidative stress is good. Too much, stressful, creates problems. Not enough, stressful, creates problems. It's definitely a goal. So when you are in the sauna, or you are in the sun, or you exercise, you will create oxidative stress. That oxidative stress turns on NRF2. This is essentially a transcription factor that translates locates the nucleus, turns on genes involved in the antioxidant response, things like glutathione peroxidase, thioredoxin, things like this. They manage those free radicals. And that's just, it's kind of clean, right? You put the system that turns on genes. Molecular hormesis is a little different. It's like going to the pharmacy and taking medicine. But what we never get with plants is the package insert, quote unquote, that comes with medications in the pharmacy. You go to the pharmacy and you get a drug, this metoprolol, statin drug, even if you get ibuprofen or approximately the pharmacy, on the bottom, there's a list of all side effects. When we use exogenous molecules for humans, we know, formally they well with their biochemistry, they're going to do one thing, which may be an intended, but they're going to have other effects elsewhere, which can be damaging. And at the very least, see this medications we take. We know that beta blockers can affect glucose tolerance, they can affect synthetic signaling in the body with the nervous system. We know that lisinopril, drugs like this, which affect the kidneys, can have problems with electrolyte balance and other things. They can affect the lungs because they're affecting the angiotensin enzyme works, but they have side effects. And so my concern is that we're conflating it, and we're forgetting about the side effects that are associated with molecular movements. I think that there certainly are studies with molecules like sulforaphane, which is this isothiocyanate compound that show that it also triggers NRF2. It triggers this antioxidant response system. But what we aren't told about much is the other side effects of sulforaphane, the so-called package insert that sulforaphane has. And when you look at that, there's a large amount of evidence that this whole class of molecules, isothiocyanates, actually have many negative effects on the body. When you think about it from a plant's perspective, sulforaphane is pretty clearly toxic. It's a food term. So one of the things I like to ask for is how much zero until you chew them. There's no sulforaphane, broccoli, or kale, or rabi, or any of these grassy vegetables to chew them. And Mom has talked about how this now works. There's a precursor molecule called glucophage, which is a glucosinolate. And it's like a booby tree. It's like super glue. You get two things combined. So you get glucoraphanin, it's a precursor molecule. There's an enzyme called myrosinase in a separate compartment of the cell. When you chew the cell, you break the cell wall and combine, and out comes sulfur. So it's a booby trap. It's like, if you're going to eat me, I'm going to make this molecule. It's going to affect you. It's going to be a pro-oxidant, right? Because if you look at the chemistry of sulforaphane, it actually is a pro-oxidant, meaning it's pulling electrons from other molecules. It's not actually coming into our body as an antioxidant. It's turning on our antioxidant defense system, but it's also doing other negative things to the body. In the case of isothiocyanase, it's actually been shown to damage the egg, which is a process called plastogenesis, and it inhibits iodine absorption.
This is also pure.
Also for, yeah, and there are other molecules like this that are also found in these type of foods, the brassica family of foods. Things like goitrin or allyl isothiocyanate, called isothiocyanates. They're widely known to affect iodine chemistry in the liquid thyroid. You ever seen the big Macs in Africa, like the goiters, there's an endemic goiter, it's huge now. That's hypothyroidism because they're consuming lots of foods that have goitrogenic, that are goitrogenic foods, lots of foods that have similarly isothiocyanate compounds that are inhibiting the absorption or at least the utilization of iodine from the thyroid. So it's working against the thyroid. So the intent of plants is very clear. It's saying, if you eat too much of me, I'm going to affect your thyroid negatively, and that's going to affect every other hormonal system in your body. So yes, sulforaphane can be beneficial because it turns on our antioxidant response system, but it also has many side effects which are ignored. And we see this pattern over and over and over. This is what's fascinating. We see this pattern over and over and over in molecules. And then if you look at these two, people might say, well, is the risk worth the benefit? I would argue it's not. Or I would argue the benefit is not worth the risk because you can get your NRF2 system turned on without those molecules because of environmental reasons. You can go in the sun, you can exercise, you can fast, you can be in ketosis. There's really good studies cold water swimmers in Berlin, and they show that cold water exposure. So they swim in cold water for like an hour, and they'll show that their glutathione goes down, meaning that they oxidize the glutathione goes up, they reduce the glutathione goes down. They're using their endogenous antioxidant molecule, one of them, which is glutathione, to mitigate these newly produced oxidative radicals, these free radicals in the body produced by cold water swimming. And the next day, they'll see their glutathione is a little bit above normal. That's one reason. That's environmental reasons. So my argument is, can we really say that plant molecules give us a net benefit? I don't think you can. There's lots of interesting studies here that argue that you don't really get a net benefit from plant molecules. It's kind of a redundant effect. We can get this NRF2 system, this antioxidant response system turned on without them, and then we're getting all of the downstream negative side effects of these plant molecules.
Have there been any independent studies that show people taking like broccoli sprouts and then doing it for a prolonged period of time, measuring their system, and then doing environmental analysis and seeing if they measure?
Well, there's actually studies that show they have two groups of people that can pull these off. One, there's studies that compare people that ate essentially no vegetables or low fruits and vegetables to high fruits and vegetables. You know, compare them for 8, 12 weeks. And at the end, they see no differences in the oxidative stress markers, the inflammatory markers, markers of DNA damage. So it's pretty shaky ground to say that invariably all the studies of fruits and vegetables show that they provide this benefit. In the short term, sulforaphane can create more antioxidant response, you get more glutathione. But if you take it out a little bit of time, it doesn't look like there's any difference between people who are eating things like broccoli or Jerusalem artichokes or carrots or cabbage or any other vegetables compared to a group that eats none of them. So there's these fruit and vegetable intervention studies which don't show any difference between people.
That's bananas. So all the people that are thinking that they're doing a good thing for their system by taking these vegetables and fruits that have this from your body has this fermented response. You can have the exact same response from cold plunge, from sauna, from exercise.
You're turning on the exact same system in your body.
But what about the vitamins that you're getting from plants?
Right.
there are essential nutrients and phytonutrients that you get from plants. What about those?
So this is really interesting when you look into it. There are really, this is going to sound extreme when I say it, but I'll back it up. There are no nutrients in plants that you cannot get from animal foods in essentially equivalent or more bioequivalent forms.
How come when like cats eat an animal, they go for the guts first, and they'll actually eat the grass that's in the guts of the cow?
I don't know.
Guts of a ruminant.
I don't know why they would do that. I guess it's fermented. I don't know. Because if you look at the nutrients in animal foods, right? There are many nutrients in animal foods that do not occur in plants. We know this. B12. But the list is much bigger. Vitamin K2, choline, carnosine, carnitine, anserine, taurine. The list is extremely long. But you can't say the same thing about plants. There are no nutrients that occur in plants that you can't get from animal foods.
None. Vitamin C.
You can definitely get vitamin C from animal foods.
You get it from
Liver, heart, muscle, it all has vitamin C. So in the 1930s, from 1935 to 1942 or 43, they did a series of studies. I think it was in Sheffield, England. I got the study I can show you. And they had conscientious objectors of the war. And they had them take different amounts of vitamin C to see how long it would take to get scurvy. And doses as low as 10 milligrams of vitamin C per day to prevent scurvy.
the experiment with conscientious.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 10 milligrams a day. Yeah. 10.
Wow.
Just scroll down to the next page, Jamie. You'll see the doses. Yeah. There was 10 milligrams of vitamin C will prevent scurvy.
Right.
So,
But obviously that's not
well, we don't know. Yeah, because if you look at the amount of vitamin C, they say there that between the 70 milligram group and the 10 milligram group, there was no difference in clinical outcomes. Prevailing thinking is that 10 milligrams is not enough for optimal, but you don't actually know. There are roles of vitamin C beyond the formation of collagen, which is the main thing that gets broken when we see scurvy. At least that's the physical manifestations. You can bleed bones, your teeth fall out. It's all collagenous tissue, the connective tissue in the body starts to break down because you can't hydroxylate proline residues of the collagen molecule. But when you look at it beyond that, there's actually some pretty good studies. I'll see if I can find one. Definitely got one in here. That shows that if you look at people eating, did another experiment with excess fruits and vegetables. And they had one group that had small amounts of fruits and vegetables, and now we're going to skip up to 7. It's a little bit more than 10. There's no experiments with like long-term 10 milligrams of vitamin C. But there's an experiment that compares 70 milligrams of vitamin C per day, low fruits and vegetables, to 270 milligrams of fruits and vegetables, 260 milligrams of vitamin C in fruits and vegetables. There were no clinical differences in these outcomes. So one group has low fruits and vegetables, one group has high fruits and vegetables.
how long is this stuff?
I think it was 8 weeks before.
Is that long enough to see a detrimental effect or a positive benefit?
Well, I think that if you're thinking about things in terms of oxidative stress, that happens pretty quickly. You would definitely, I think, begin to see increased DNA damage. We measure it with this marker called beta-hydroxy-2-deoxy-guanosine peroxides, inflammation. I think you would see it, start to see it pretty quickly when you get lower levels of vitamin C. The higher vitamin C from fruits and vegetables certainly had a higher level of vitamin C in their blood, but they didn't have any differences in terms of those markers.
This one is, what about the benefits of vitamin C in fighting off colds and infections?
Right. So the interventional studies with that generally fail.
Really?
Yeah.
But the consensus wisdom is that, like, if you have a virus,
Right, take vitamin C.
C.
Take vitamin C, yeah. Should be this one. So if you go to the vitamin C folder, Jamie, and then you go to the vitamin C from an evolutionary perspective study, you'll see a list of all the interventional studies with vitamin C. Scroll down to the table 2. So one more table down. That one. So you'll see these are interventional studies with vitamin C, and there's a RCT there for the common cold. It's a meta-analysis, actually, which was 1,006 participants. There was no effect on the incidence of the common cold. So this gets into the interesting conversation about epidemiology. I know you know about this. The way that epidemiology is so misleading for us.
Yeah.
And if you look at the association of vitamin C in the blood, there's an association with better outcomes. But when we do interventional studies, we don't see it. And within this table, you can see no effect on mortality, no effect on the incidence of common cold, no effect on cardiovascular events, and essentially no decrease in systolic blood pressure intervention.
No effect, no incidence, no incidence of common cold. But what about once someone has it? That is like when emergency, those different vitamin supplements. This is what they're always claiming, that taking it while you have the cold is going to reduce the duration of the disease. Included that vitamin C supplementation has no effect on the incidence of cold. However, a modest reduction of symptoms was consistent.
If you're eating a couple ounces of liver per day, some beef per day, other organs, you can get pretty close to 70 milligrams of vitamin C a day, which is basically the RDA. The RDA like 70 or 90 milligrams of vitamin C.
Now, this expression nose to tail of what we're talking about, what you're talking about is organ meats.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's eating organ meats. Most people that think of eating animal products think of just eating tissue, muscle tissue.
And it's so funny. I recently was hanging out with Steve Ranella. He was telling me historically, the trappers, like these fur trappers, maybe in the 1800s, at some point along the way, we lost this ancestral knowledge that eating organs is so important, and that all of indigenous cultures do it, and savor the organs, really above all other things, and they distribute them among the tribe. These trappers went out, and they started to just not, they started to get sick from just eating muscle. They had to start incorporating organs in their diet. It was a historical reference. I'm not sure where he read it, but yeah, if you look at the way that indigenous cultures do this, you look at the way that other animals do this as well. They don't waste it.
Particularly, we have talked about it many times on the podcast. Wolves, the alpha wolf will eat the liver, and the other wolves have to stand by. And there's a crazy documentary on a guy who lived with wolves, and one of the ways he tricked these wolves thinking that he was the alpha was he would have an animal and he would put a liver in the animal, so they would bring a carcass, and he would be growling at them while he ate the liver, and they were like, "Oh, this is just the fucking boss. He's eating the liver."
You eat liver, you get to be an alpha male or an alpha female.
Well, it was weird that he knew, and that this is just wolves know in their pack mentality that the alpha is the most nutritious piece of the animal.
And there are even organs beyond the liver that are uniquely nutritious. The heart is prized, the spleen, pancreas. These are things we don't eat much as westernized humans, but kidneys are prized. I mean, there was this really interesting Arctic explorer, Villimore Stephenson. Have you heard of his adventures in the early 1900s?
I have.
Yeah, so he wrote The Fat of the Land, Not by Bread Alone. He had quotes, I have a quote from him here in the apology. So he would say that actually it's in the nose to tail folder, that. There's a screenshot there. So he would say that while meat of any kind is in great demand, it is interesting to note the following are the favorite cuts. The brisket of the beef, the fat, and the cartilages. So these indigenous cultures in the Arctic would they would favor things with fat and connective tissue. The skin and subcutaneous fat of warthog, pig skin, hog's head, and brains. And number 4 is the liver of any animal.
Look at that. Pig skin is never saved for rawhide and leather. It's too valuable as food. It is eaten after singeing off the hair and a prolonged boiling. One pound of cow skin is similarly eaten. The lean cow skin will be saved for rawhide and leather. The hog's head, brains, and fat are both delicacies. The liver of any animal, the hands and feet of monkey because of the fat content.
So they tend to favor the fat and the organs.
So they're eating monkey heads. Should we really listen to them?
I've never had monkey heads. You ever had brain?
No. I've had calf's brain when I was a child. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. My uncle Vinny used to, they used to, I guess it was calf's brain or lamb's brain. I don't remember. But I remember they would grill it. And I found it so strange that we're eating it. Wish I could remember if I liked it or not. But I also, like, I was probably 6, and I don't know if I had a sensibility towards different, interesting. Like I enjoy liver now. I actually like it. I enjoy heart. I eat it. I like some things that other people. I like sea urchin. I like things that people might find weird because of the texture alone. So I don't know if I felt that.
Liver is amazing. I know you had the guys from Black Rifle on. They were saying that when they were taking the desiccated organ supplements, they had a rush of energy. But I kind of have this thing that I like to do with people where I have them eat raw liver, and it's really cool to see how it turns the brain on. The baseline nutrition depends, will determine how much of a buzz they get, but of course there's always food
Have you ever done it with bile, like where you slice the liver and squirt bile on it?
I haven't. I'm hopefully going to hunt this year, and I want to do that with the gallbladder.
Yeah.
But I think that it's so interesting to see that they savor the things that are salty. There was a little bit of salt in the gallbladder. Yeah, I've heard of indigenous cultures using the gallbladder as condiments.
I think Brunella did that on one of the shows where he cut raw liver and ate it with gallbladder.
Yeah.
That's got to be a strong flavor.
I'll report back.
Yeah.
I've eaten a lot of the animal, but I've never eaten the gall fluid, so I've never eaten the bile.
The Comanche used to love to do that with buffalo. Take the buffalo liver raw and warm, right from the fresh kill, squirt gallbladder on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be that. I would say it can't be that bad, but then you hear about like people in Iceland eat that pickled shark that Anthony Bourdain told me is the single most disgusting thing he's ever eaten in his life. And they love it. It's like a delicacy.
Well, I've eaten warm liver out of a deer, so I hunted it.
Is this Ranella doing it? Oh. Okay, so that's the gallbladder. He's cutting open, tearing it, I should say. He's taking out that whole grass. Crazy. It doesn't look appetizing. Not at all. No. Is that what that is right there? I mean,
If it's gallbladder, that's the bile.
What's all that grass?
أحمد وزم عربك والنسم خش كمبانيا صدمة يا ولد تبي فلبيني
It's grass, just bile. It could be coagulated.
Yeah, let's give them some volume.
All their food goes from the crop, which is the whole thing.
Oh, that's a bird.
Down to
So this must be
all
a
that grass.
turkey. Oh, it's a turkey. Edible organs. Oh, it's a gizzard. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I've had gizzards from chickens before. My family, I'm Italian, as you are, right?
Yeah.
See if you find the edible organs thing. That's wild turkey. See if you can find Brunella eats raw liver with bile.
Have you ever had raw liver?
I have not.
Joe, we can do it.
Yeah.
I brought some.
You did? Go get it. Go get it. Let's eat it. I'll eat some raw liver. James is gonna throw up. Look at him. He already started making noises. He already started making noises. You already had milk. What does that have to do with this?
No vegetables.
Don't sit down. What kind of liver is this?
It's cow's liver. It's grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised cows from White Oak pastures in Georgia.
They're quite chewy. So what's supposed to be the reaction? It doesn't taste much different than cooking them.
I think that in the tribes, there's an interesting tribe in Africa called the Nuer tribe, and liver is so sacred that they couldn't even touch it with human hands. I don't know how they got it from the animals in people's mouths, but they would eat it. A lot of cultures eat it raw. They'll just cut it up and eat it raw. I think that the idea is you lose a little bit of nutrients when you cook it. Not much, but you lose a little bit. So I've always been fascinated by how many of this is such a nutrient-rich organ. How much of it can I actually preserve in terms of nutrients, and do I feel differently when I eat it raw? And there's a lot of interesting nutrients in liver that aren't well represented in the muscle meat, which we were talking about. So muscle meat's a great source of B12 and zinc and iron and other things. But so in the nose to tail folder, Jamie, there's a graphic from my book that compares.
Well, look at that. There's cool last name. I agree with this. Keyboard. Price also added the notion that liver is truly a prize food for indigenous people regarding an African tribe known as the Nuer. He stated, I learned that they have a belief, which to them is their religion, namely that every man and woman has a soul which resides in the liver, that a man's character and physical growth depends upon how well he feeds that soul by eating the livers of animals. The liver is so sacred that it may not be touched by human hands. Now, if that's the case, how do you explain blood pressure? Because that motherfucker's liver is overworked. Maybe. Yeah, he probably has like foie gras. Right?
Human foie gras.
Yeah, I mean, his liver is totally overfed, completely fatty.
That's not what you want. That's
Foie
non-alcoholic.
gras is not good.
Well, no, foie gras is probably. I don't know that I'd be excited about eating foie gras. They're like overfeeding the ducks, right? So it is. It's probably it's a diseased liver.
Yeah. Well, people are like, well, you shouldn't do that. The weird thing about it is the ducks go to the feeding field and go to it and want it to happen. Like in our eyes, like this forced feeding is a terrible thing. But they actually gravitate towards that pipe. It's a very, like, I'm not in favor of doing weird shit to animals. I'm not in favor of giving them food they're not supposed to eat. I'm not in favor of overfeeding or force feeding them. But I just find it odd that they go to that point. Like, you ever seen how they do it?
I wonder what's in it. I wonder what they feed. I'm pretty sure it's grains.
I'm pretty sure that's where, like, see if you can find them ducks getting fed grains.
Yeah, I wonder if they do anything to the grains to make them overeat. Because there are lots of studies in rodents. Sometimes you can use rodents that are genetically predisposed to become beasts. But if you alter the food, we know this with humans, you can alter food in some ways to make it more palatable and to kind of show a certain type. These ducks are not it. This guy's traveling with the neck.
But this is a different setup. This is a handmade one, or a handheld one. The video that I saw, like this, yeah, I'm sure. It's the way I saw it, it was like there was a pipe in the center. The Hudson Valley, all around there, this, I think this is probably. See, you're grabbing the duck. They're not commanding them what to do. It just seems gross.
Yeah, it is.
But here's what's weird about it. Is that any grosser than today's apartment? You know, because there's a lot of stuff that's legal that we do to animals. But we decide what's legal and what's not legal because factory farming should be fucking completely illegal. And it's legal in California. You can get factory fed animals and you can buy them left and right. What you can't get is foie gras anymore. I'm like, well, listen, guys, you're not making any sense. Like, this is one small moment of this duck's day where they're feeding. They're shoving a tube in his mouth and overfeeding. The life of a pig that you eat for bacon is a terrible, tortured life. And you're okay with that. You're just not okay with this fucking duck getting extra grain pumped down its mouth. Meanwhile, they just living a normal life other than that.
And feedlots. I mean, I think I agree with you completely. Factory farming is a scourge. It should. I don't know why we keep doing it. I think there's a lot of corn and soy subsidies that are supported by it. It's really unfortunate, but there's a lot of really interesting discussion about the sustainability of grass-fed, grass-finished meat, and this regenerative agriculture concept. But is it sustainable at scale, though? Like, could you still have Jack in the Box if you have grass-fed, grass-finished meat? I think we can both agree that grass-fed, grass-finished meat is healthier to consume. But the disagreement comes, like Bourdain, again, rest his soul, would say he prefers grain-fed cows because he finds the meat to be more delicious and tender. He liked it better as a chef. And that's a culinary choice. Like he, as an artist creating food, he preferred an animal that was, like people that want you. They like that kind of. I think that's a fucking dying animal, man. I agree with you. If you look at the way that cattle are factory farmed, the reason they have all that intramuscular fat is because they are less metabolically healthy than their grass-fed, grass-finished cohorts. The sustainability or the scalability argument is so important to consider. So when I think about this, I think about it from a couple of perspectives. There's the land use perspective, but there's also just the actual mathematics of it that 99-ish% of cows that we eat that are grain finished had 85% of their life on grass. They're not raised from calves in the factory farm. So then I think, like, wait a minute, we're already raising all of our cattle on grass for 85% of their lives. We're just sending them to factory farms at the end. And I think it's a consumer-driven thing. Because people want that type of meat where they're not familiar with the gamey flavor or texture, or they want it to be intramuscular fat and it's have more marbling. And then the other aspect is the actual land use. And then you think about how much land is used to grow corn and soy. And then if we get rid of all the corn and soy that goes to animals in the feedlots, we can graze cattle. And there's actually, I believe it's called a conservation reserve program. The federal government pays farmers to let their lands lay fallow for decades. There's hundreds of thousands of acres in the United States that are not being farmed because they were monocropped to basically, they were monocropped so badly they have no nutrients, they can't grow plants. So I think what everyone is missing, well, not the people in the regenerative agriculture space, not you, but the mainstream is missing that in order to regenerate, in order to make land healthy, you put animals on land. That's why the center of the country where there were plains and bison and antelope and deer had the richest soil anywhere until we monocropped it. And then we depleted nutrients and said, negative stuff. It's just that safe, we're just pulling nutrients out. When you talk to the folks in White Oak pastures in Georgia or other regenerative farms, you look at the soil. It's incredible. When the animals live on the soil in an ecosystem, it puts nutrients back in the soil. The soil is like the color of coffee grounds. So I was in Georgia recently at Bluffton at White Oak doing photographs for a cookbook of mine. And Will Harris, who's a colleague of Joel Salatin, Joel Bobcast. Yeah. And so Will had 2 jars in one of the churches on his property in Bluffton. And one jar is soil from his farm. And it's the color of coffee grounds. It's like 5% soil content. The other jar is from 25 yards away on his neighbor's pasture, growing cotton or soy. It's like the color of this wood table. It's a light brown. They're completely different. If you look at the soil content of carbon, it's 0.5%. So you have 10x the amount of carbon in the soil when it's from regenerative. They've been doing regenerative agriculture for 20 years. You can see the steady increase in the amount of soil carbon. I'll hold that. There's a graphic of this in my book.
And it just completely makes sense because manure is fertilizer. Animals eat the grass. They make manure. The manure is fertilizer. Worms and bugs live under the manure. There's an entire ecosystem that evolves around these animals living the way they've lived for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. It makes sense that it all works together synergistically to feed soil and to provide nutrients for the very animals, and those animals will die on that land. They will rot. They will provide even more fertilizer, and then other animals will live off of them and live in that area. And they too will die, and they will shit all over the place and piss all over the place. And they will feed the soil. This is a system. And we fucked that system up by growing corn. We fucked that system up by growing, 1 million acres of soybeans, or whatever the fuck
Why are we eating those things?
Well, it seems like we thought it was a great idea during World War One and World War Two because they needed food. The reason why all this like subsidies of farmers happen is not that the agriculture business is evil and the government is in bed with them. What happened was during the First and Second World War, there was a need for surplus food. There was a need for food because there was back then was a very real concern for supplies for troops, for supplies for the United States. What I mean, we were at war. I mean, a crazy war that I don't think today in our 2020 version of war, which always happens in some remote, faraway land, and it's always a domination by the United States. I don't think we really understand the desperate and terrifying times when they were, asking people to donate metal and rubber. I mean, it was a crazy time, and the government stepped in and said, "We are going to pay farmers to grow corn. We need food," and so they subsidized these farmers to grow all this food. Now it's become a different animal because now they're subsidizing people to grow corn that is mostly, in a lot of cases, like I have a friend who's they grow for livestock. They have a huge area that they grow corn. It's all, by the way, Monsanto, right? They're spraying that fucking Roundup on it, which is, glyphosate is terrible. And I had a podcast about that recently, about environmental chemicals and how bad they are for you, and then how that stuff actually can be in the meat and can, in turn, get into your system and provide you with all sorts of problems. And this is why there's subsidizing for farmers. It's also because we need farmers, we need healthy, and this is just not the way to do it, though. If we could just get people off the tip of corn, get people off the tip of these monocrop agriculture, we would be a healthier country. If we can have these giant areas where we grow all kinds of things, like polyphase farms. Joe Salatin, for instance, he moves all of his animals around. He lets all of his pigs. They live like wild pigs. They just eat acorns and nuts and all these different things. He supplements them sometimes. And he has incredible soil, the farm you're describing, incredibly healthy animals.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
And I love that you said that. It's just we have this dependence on soy and corn-based economies now. And I love that the regenerative agriculture movement is starting. And then slowly, there are more farms that are shifting and shifting and shifting. Before the podcast, I was telling you about a ranch in Fredericksburg called Rome Ranch.
Yes.
And they're really cool. They raise bison. And if you look at the ground, so when I was out at Rome, I stood like a couple of feet from a buffalo or a bison. I don't know.
Was there a fence between you and the bison? Why
No.
are you doing that?
It was
Did you watch videos?
Did you watch YouTube? This is a universal moment.
Bro, this is a great video of a bison charging another bison and launching it into the air. Think about how big. What does a bison weigh? Like 2,000 pounds?
It was intense. It's just kind of like this. We had this fun.
Look at that. Those are amazing animals.
Beautiful animals.
They're so amazing.
And if you look at the ground at Rome Ranch, this is Fredericksburg, Texas. This is land that was monocropped. I mean, this is land that used to be fertile in southern Texas that was destroyed. Okay, and then actually, they're starting to regenerate. They've been regenerated, I think, for 3 or 5 years, and they start to get more grass growing on a piece of soil. So if you look at a square foot,
Hold up, scroll that down now. The hunts? How do you hunt somebody stand right next to you?
they have access out there.
Oh, okay, that's different.
Yeah.
They will not let you stand next to me.
They will let you stand next to
Access deer?
No, they will let you stand next to the axis, but you can stand next to the
No, I'm
bison.
saying, I'm saying access deer will not let you stand next to them. Also, they have access deer hunts there.
Yeah.
So this is only like an hour plus from here.
Yeah.
Oh, they have archery hunts there too.
Yeah.
There's the hollow.
Yeah, it's a great spot. But if you look at the ground, and you look at a square foot of the ground at Rome Ranch, you can see that on the pastures that the bison are in, only 30 or 40% of that earth is growing grass. But you know that in the future, if you move it out 20 years, like White Oak Pastures has done,
Salamat, Ahmad. Why not?
right? And that's feeding the cattle in a much more rich way. So that's what regenerative agriculture is about.
We should go there. We should go there and we should make a video.
We should.
Of us going there and talking about that and throw it up on YouTube. I think that would be really interesting.
I'd love to. They're great.
I'm not going to get near the fucking bison. I'm going to learn my lesson from other people.
Well, we go out there with Katie and Taylor, who own the farm, take care of it. And there's people out there who work with the bison. They know which animals are more.
Yeah, see, that's aggressive. Fuck all that, man. Let's make a mistake. Oh, I thought it was mine. That's Bill. Bill's crazy. Look on your Bill.
The head of the buffalo, the head of the bison was the size of my torso. It was moving, man. I was like, wow. I like experiences that make me feel small.
Yeah, well, right. Do it, man.
Backcountry skiing or this crest trail and stuff.
This whole area used to be run by bison.
Yeah.
The Comanche were an animal-based culture, which is really interesting.
That book, Empire.
Yes, fantastic book. But they really didn't eat much else. They ate a little bit of berries here and there, but most of what their diet was meat. And that they also had, there was a benefit to that in terms of the way they could travel, because they could go without food longer than people that were mostly carbohydrate-based. Carbohydrate-based guys, like the soldiers, would crash, and the Comanches could keep going because their body was just going into ketosis and a lot of fat. It was a natural shift back and forth between eating meat, eating fat, eating organs, to not eating for a while.
And so few humans in 2020 have gone for more than 18 hours without eating.
Yeah.
Very few of us in how many decades we've lived have utilized the fat burning systems in our body. You can use glucose or fructose or sugars. You can use carbohydrates. You can do glycolysis. But there's a whole other system where you can either use fat that's coming in or use fat from your body made of oxidation and ketones, the fat, basically precursor molecules in the body. And when we get adapted to that, we have this extra engine. We have two engines. We're both hybrid and gas. But if we go long enough without ever using the hybrid, fat burning engine, we kind of lose it. But you can get it back pretty quickly.
It's kind of interesting today that there are a lot of people that are interested in intermittent fasting or having the very specific feeding window, and they are seeing benefits of that. And I was reading some article recently that was saying a study shows there's no weight loss benefit to intermittent fasting. And I'm like, who made that fucking study? And who are you studying? And how is that? Everybody that I know that's done it has lost weight. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what is that study about? And why would someone be even interested in promoting that?
So much of what gets done in the nutrition community and research is
fuckery.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fuckery, right?
And the devil's in the details, right? What were they feeding them? What were the oils in the food? What were they doing for intermittent fasting? Were they intermittent fasting with junk food? Were they intermittent fasting with standard American diet? I think it's pretty clear. There's a lot of compelling data in both, at least in animal models, and I believe in human models too, that having a feeding window and having time when your body shifts from, quote, carbohydrate burning or using the glycogen stored in your liver to making ketones, even on a daily basis, that cycling is beneficial for humans. You're flipping back and forth between anabolic and catabolic pathways. At a broad level, you're looking at systems like mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, kinase. They're balancing systems. This is kind of a seesaw. And we know that when you have kinase at a very broad level, when you have more of this ketogenic physiology, when you exhaust the glycogen in your liver, you turn on these autophagy mechanisms. You do the cellular housekeeping. That's beneficial for humans. Our ancestors would certainly have done.
Please explain that to people. The cellular housekeeping. That your body actually does get rid of some damaged cells.
Damaged cells and damaged proteins within cells and damaged mitochondria. So within the cell, there are these powerhouse factories, which are probably ancient bacteria, billions of years ago, that combined with a single-cell organism. We became eukaryotic with a membrane-bound nucleus and a membrane-bound organelle called mitochondria, which produces ATP for the body. And so within the body, there are all these organelles within our cells, and some of them, the job of that organelle is to basically be the trash compactor. Old proteins are ubiquinated and they're moved to the organelles that recycle them. And so you do this cellular house cleaning, but it seems to happen more when you're in this state of ketosis or you're not using the glucose from, or when you're not in sort of an anabolic physiology. So you can see that with our ancestors, we would have switched back and forth. We wouldn't have been successful in hunts every day. We would have had some hunts that were successful and some gathering sessions which were successful, and others which weren't. When they're not successful, you're fasting, and so that's a beneficial thing. I mean, I think that intermittent cellular house cleaning is an ancestral pattern that we would do well to espouse, to mirror.
And so your body doesn't have any food to digest. So it's like, look, let's do some cleaning up. We got a bunch of junk laying around the attic. Let's sweep it up. But if we're doing the standard American thing, which is to eat constantly, snack throughout the day, and then can't wait to have dinner, and then can't wait to have breakfast, and can't wait to have lunch, and your body never really gets a break. It's always digesting.
It's always digesting. I mean, it would be so interesting to look at the Western population, the American population, and see how many of them actually exhaust liver glycogen overnight. How many people actually wake up with ketones in their blood? I think it would be a fraction. I think the majority of people never get rid of their liver glycogen, never actually flip. And to be fair, I actually don't think we should always be in ketosis either. I think that can present some challenges to human physiology, and that intermittent, inclusion of carbohydrates can be beneficial for humans. This is a cycle, it's a circle, like many things are in our life. And our ancestors, in spite of the fact that they favored meat and organs, they certainly would have had carbohydrates from time to time when they were available. So that's this balance. I think that personally, the people I've worked with and the reading that I've done, everything I've learned, it works better to be cyclic ketosis rather than persistent ketosis all the time. Though ketogenic physiology, I think, is intrinsic to humans. It's beneficial, super healthy, and a lot of people find massive benefits from it.
Well, ketosis, particularly for people that have epilepsy, and for seals that work on those rebreathers, they found that being in ketosis can keep them from having seizures.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of fascinating.
It changes the neural physiology.
Yeah. Well, for children that have epilepsy, they found a great benefit in being ketosis. It makes sense that your body would fare best on the things that it evolved with. The things that it evolved with are mostly animals, fish, and fruits.
I agree with you.
Whatever you could, obviously you don't get fruit all year round. You get it at a specific time when the fruit falls from the tree. But animals were available 365 days a year, and that's most likely what a lot of people ate.
And if you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, that's what we see.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me that they have a preference for animal foods.
Yeah.
A lot of them will eat tubers occasionally. There's actually a pretty cool study. You'll find it in